Technology has improved lives in so many ways, but nothing lasts forever, and sooner or later, some poor schmuck has to fix it. The Repairman by Harry Harrison. Read by Karl Wallace. The old man had that look of intense glee on his face that meant someone was in for a very rough time. Since we were alone, it took no great feat of intelligence to figure it would be me. I talked first, bold attack being the best defense and so forth. I quit. Don't bother telling me what dirty job you have cooked up, because I have already quit, and you do not want to reveal company secrets to me. The grin was even wider now, and he actually chortled as he thumbed a button on his console. A thick legal document slid out of the delivery slot onto his desk. This is your contract, he said. It tells us how and when you will work. A steel and vanadium-bound contract you couldn't crack with a molecular disruptor. I leaned out quickly, grabbed it, threw it in the air with a single motion. Before it could fall, I had my solar out, and with a wide-angle shot, burned the contract to ashes. The old man pressed the button again. Another contract slid out on his desk. If possible, the smile was still wider now. I should have said a duplicate of your contract, like this one here. He made a quick note on his secretary plate. I have deducted 13 credits from your salary for the cost of the duplicate, as well as a 100 credit fine for firing a solar inside a building. I slumped, defeated, waiting for the blow to land. The old man fondled my contract. According to this document, you can't quit. Ever. I therefore have a little job I hope you'll enjoy. Repair job. The Procyon beacon is shut down. It's a Mark III beacon. What kind of beacon? I asked him. I repaired hyperspace beacons from one arm of the galaxy to the other, and I was sure I'd worked on every type or model made. But I never heard of this kind. Mark III, the old man repeated with sly humor. Never heard of it either until records dug up the specs. They found it buried in the back of their oldest warehouse. This was the earliest type of beacon ever built, by Earth no less. Considering its location on one of the Procyon planets, it may well be the first beacon ever made. I looked at the blueprints he handed me and felt my eyes glaze with horror. It's a monstrosity. Looks more like a distillery than a beacon. Must be at least a few 100 meters tall. I'm a repairman, not an archaeologist. This pile of junk is over 2,000 years old. Just forget about it and build a new one. The old man leaned over his desk, breathing into my face. It would take a year to install a new beacon, besides being too expensive, and this Reich is on one of the main routes. We have ships making 15-year light detours now. He leaned back, wiped his hands on his handkerchief, and gave me a lecture of 44 on company duty and my troubles. This department is officially called maintenance and repair, when it really should be called troubleshooting. Hyperspace beacons are made to last forever, or damn close to it. When one of them breaks down, it's never an accident, and repairing a thing is never a matter of just plugging in a new part. He was telling me, the guy who did the job while he sat back in his fat paycheck in an air-conditioned office. He rambled on. How I wish that were all it took. I would have a fleet of part ships and junior mechanics to install them. But it's not like that at all. I have a fleet of expensive ships that are equipped to do almost anything, all of them manned by a bunch of irresponsibles just like you. I nodded moodily at his pointing finger. How I wish I could fire you all. Combination of space jockeys, mechanics, engineers, soldiers, con men, anything else it takes to do the repairs. Have to browbeat, bribe, blackmail, and bulldoze you thugs into doing a simple job. If you think you're fed up, just think how I feel. But the ships must go through. The beacons must operate. I recognized his deskless line as the curtain speech and crawled to my feet. He threw the Mark III file at me and went back to scratching in his papers. Just as I reached the door, he looked up and impaled me on his finger again. Don't get any fancy ideas about dropping your contract. We can attach that bank account of yours on Algo 2 long before you could draw the money out. I smiled. A little weakly, I'm afraid. I never meant to keep that account a secret. The spies were getting more efficient every day. Walking down the hall, I tried to figure out a way to transfer the money without his catching on. At the same time, I knew he was busy figuring a way to outfigure me. It was all very depressing, so I stopped for a drink, then went on to the spaceport. By the time the ship was serviced, I had the course charted. The nearest beacon to the broken-down Procyon beacon was on one of the planets of Beta Circanus, and I headed there first. Short trip of only about 9 days in hyperspace. To understand the importance of the beacons, you have to understand hyperspace. Not that many people do, but it is easy enough to understand that as non-space, the regular rules don't apply. Speed of measurements are a matter of relationship, not constant facts like the fixed universe. The first ships to enter hyperspace had no place to go, no way to even tell if they'd moved. The beacons solved that problem and opened the entire universe. They bolt on planets and generate tremendous amounts of power. This power turned into radiation and is punched through into hyperspace. Every beacon is a code signal as part of its radiation and represents a measurable point in hyperspace. Triangulation of the beacons works for navigation, only follows its own rules. The rules are complex and variable, but they're still rules that any navigator can follow. For hyperspace jump, you need at least 4 beacons for an accurate fix. For long jumps, navigators use as many as 7 or 8. If every beacon is important, everyone has to keep operating. That's where I and the other troubleshooters come in. We travel in well-stocked ships that carry a little bit of everything. Only one man to a ship, because that's all it takes to operate the overly efficient repair machinery. Due to the very nature of our job, we spend most of our time just rocketing through normal space. After all, when a beacon breaks down, how do you find it? Not through hyperspace. All you can do is approach as close as you can by using other beacons, then finish the ship in normal space. This can take months, and often does. This job didn't turn out to be quite that bad. I zeroed the Beta Circanus beacon and ran a complicated 8-point problem through the navigator, using every beacon I could get an accurate fix on. The computer gave me a course with an estimated point of arrival, as well as a built-in safety factor I never could eliminate from the machine. I would much rather take a chance of breaking through near some star than spend time just barreling through normal space, but apparently tech knows this too. They had a safety factor baked into the computer. You couldn't end up beside the sun no matter how hard you tried. I'm sure there was no humanness in the decision. They just didn't want to lose the ship. It was a 24-hour jump, ship's time, and it came through in the middle of nowhere. The robot analyzer chuckled to itself and scanned the brightest surrounding stars, comparing each to the spectrum of Procyon. It finally rang a bell and blinked the light. I peeped through the eyepiece. A last reading with the photocell gave me the accurate magnitude, and a comparison with its absolute magnitude showed its distance. Not as bad as I'd thought. A 6-week run, give or take a few days. After fixing a course tape into the robot pilot, I strapped in the acceleration tank and went to sleep. The time went fast. I rebuilt my camera for about the 20th time and just about finished the correspondence course in nucleonics. Prepare to take these courses. They have a value in themselves. You never know what bit of odd information might come in handy. Not only that, the company grades your pay by the number of specialties you can handle. All this with some oil painting and free-fall workouts in the gym past the time. I was asleep when the alarm went off that announced the planetary distance. Planet 2, where the beacon was situated, according to the old charts, was a mushy-looking wet kind of globe. Worked hard to make sense out of the ancient directions and finally located the right area. Staying inside the atmosphere, I set a flying eye down to look things over. In this business, you learn early where and when to risk your own skin. The eye would be good enough for the preliminary survey. The old boys had enough brains to choose a chaseable site for the beacon, equidistant on a line between 2 of the most prominent mountain peaks. I located the peaks easily enough and started the eye out from the first peak and kept it on a course directly toward the second. There was a nose and tail radar in the eye, and I fed their signals over a scope as an amplitude curve. When the 2 peaks coincided, I spun the eye controls and dived the thing down. I cut out the radar and cut in the nose TV pickup and sat back to watch the beacon appear on the screen. The image blinked, focused, and a great damn pyramid swam into view. I cursed and wheeled the eye in circles, scanning the surrounding country. It was flat, marshy bottom line without a bump. The only thing within a 10-mile circle was this pyramid, and it definitely wasn't my beacon. Or was it? I dived the eye lower. The pyramid was a crude-looking thing of undressed stone without carvings or decorations. There was a shimmer of light from the top, and I took a closer look at it. On the peak of the pyramid was a hollow basin filled with water. When I saw that, something clicked in my mind. Locking the eye in the circular course, I dug through the Mark III plans, and there it was. The beacon had a precipitating field and a base on top of it for water. This was used to cool the reactor that powered the monstrosity. If the water was still there, the beacon was still there, inside the pyramid. The natives, who of course weren't even mentioned by the idiots who constructed the thing, had built a nice, heavy, thick stone pyramid under the beacon. Taking a little look at the screen, I realized I had locked the eye in a circular orbit about 20 feet above the pyramid. The summit of the stone pile was now covered with lizards of some type, apparently the local life form. They had what looked like throwing stones and arrows that were trying to shoot down the eye, a cloud of rocks and arrows flying in every direction. I pulled the eye straight up and away and punched on the control circuit that would return it automatically to the ship. Then I went to the gallery for a long, stiff drink. My beak was not only locked inside a mountain of handmade stone, but I managed to irritate the things that would build the pyramid. Everything was currently designed to drive a stronger man than meat to the bottle. Normally, a repairman stays away from native cultures. They're poison. Anthropologists may not mind being dissected for their science, but a repairman wants to make no sacrifices of any kind for his job. For this reason, most beacons are built on uninhabited planets. If a beacon has to go on a planet with a culture, it's usually built in some inaccessible place. Why this beacon had been built within reach of the local claws, I had yet to find out. But that would come in time. The first thing you had to do was to make contact. To make contact, you had to know the local language. And long before that, I had worked out a system that was foolproof. I had a pry eye of my own construction. It looked like a piece of rock about a foot long. Once on the ground, it would never be noticed, though it was a little disconcerting to see it float by. I located a lizard town about 1,000 kilometers from the pyramid and dropped the eye. It swished down and landed the night on the bank of the local mud wallow. This was a favorite spot to do a good crowd during the day. In the morning, when the first wallowers arrived, I flipped on the recorder. After about 5 of the local days, I had a stack of native conversation in the memory bank of my machine translator, and I'd even tagged a few expressions. This is fairly easy to do when you have a machine memory to work with. One of the lizards gargled one letter, and the second one turned around. I tagged the expression with the phrase, "Hey George," and waited for my chance to use it. I caught one of them alone and shouted, "Hey George," at him. It gurgled out through the speaker in the local tongue, and he turned around. When you get enough reference phrases in the memory banks, the MT brain takes over and starts filling in the missing pieces. As soon as the MT could give a running translation of any conversation it heard, I figured it was time to make contact. I found him easily enough. He was a Centauran version of a goat boy. He herded a particularly loathsome form of local life in the swamps outside the town. I wanted the working eyes dig a hole in an outcropping of rock and wait for him. When he passed next day, I whispered this in the mic. "Welcome, old great goat boy grandson. This is your grandfather's spirit, speaking from paradise." This fit in with what I could make out of the local religion. Goat boy stopped as if he'd been shot. Before he could move, I pushed a switch on a handful of the local currency, wampum-type shells, rolled out of the cave and landed at his feet. "Here's some money from paradise, because you've been a good boy." Not really from paradise. I left it from the treasury the night before. "Come back tomorrow and we'll talk some more," I called after the fleeing figure. I was pleased to know he just took the cash before taking off. After that, Grandpa in Paradise had many heart-to-heart talks with grandson, who found the heavily loot more than he could resist. Grandpa had been out of touch with things since his death, and Goat Boy happily folded them in. I learned all I needed to know of the history, past and recent, and it wasn't nice. In addition to the pyramid being around the beacon, there was a nice little religious war going on around the pyramid. It all began with the land bridge. Probably the local lizards had been living in the distant swamps when the beacon had been built, but the builders hadn't thought much of them. They were low type and confined to a distant continent. The idea that the race would develop and might reach this continent never occurred to the beacon mechanics, which of course is what happened. A little geological turnover, a swampy land bridge formed in the right spot, and the lizards began to wander up Beacon Valley and found religion. A shiny metal temple out of which poured a constant stream of magic water. The reactor-killing water pumped down from the atmosphere condenser on the roof. The radioactivity in the water didn't seem to hurt the natives. If anything, it caused mutations that bred true. A city was built up around the temple, and through the centuries, the pyramid was put up around the beacon. Special branches of the priesthood served the temple. All went well until one of the priests violated the temple and destroyed the holy waters. There had been strife, revolt, murder, and destruction since then. But still the holy waters would not flow. Now armed mobs fought around the temple every day, and a new band of priests guarded the sacred font. I had to walk into the middle of that mess and repair the thing. It would have been easy enough to do if I allowed a little organized violence. I could have had a lizard fry, fixed the beacon, and taken off. I could not do this, since all native life forms were quite well protected. There were spy cells on my ship, all of which I hadn't found, that would carefully rat on me when I got back. Diplomacy was called for. I sighed and dragged out the plastifish equipment. Working from 3D snaps of Grandson, I modeled a passable reptile head over my own features. It was a little short in the jaw, me not having one of their toothy mandibles, but that was all right. Didn't have to look exactly like them, just something close, to soothe the native mind. It's logical. If I were an ignorant aborigine of Earth and ran into a spiken, who looks like a 2-foot glob of dried shellac, I would immediately leave the scene. However, if the spiken was wearing a suit of plastiflesh that looked remotely humanoid, I would at least stay and talk to him. This is what I was attempting to do with the Centaurians. When the head was done, I peeled it off and attached it to an attractive suit of green plastic as a tail. I was very glad they had tails. The lizards didn't wear clothes, and I wanted to take on a lot of electronic equipment. I built the tail over a metal frame and anchored around my waist. Then I filled the frame with all the equipment I would need and began to wire the suit. When it was done, I tried it on in front of a full-length mirror. It was horrible, but effective. The tail jammed me round in the rear and gave me a duck waddle, but that only helped the resemblance. That night I took the ship down into the hills nearest the pyramid, an out-of-the-way dry spot where the amphibious natives would never go. A little before dawn, the eye hooked onto my shoulders and we sailed straight up. We hovered above the temple at about 2,000 meters until it was light and dropped down. It must have been a grand sight. The eye was camouflaged like a flying lizard, sort of a cardboard pterodactyl, and the slowly flapping wings obviously had nothing to do with our flight. But it was impressive enough for the natives. The first one that spotted me screamed and dropped over on his back. The others came running. They milled and mobbed and piled on top of one another. By the time I arrived in the palace fronting the temple, the priest had arrived. I folded my arms in a regal stance. "Greetings, O noble servants of the great god," I said. Of course, I didn't say that out loud, just whispered softly enough for the throat mic to catch. It was radioed back to the MT, and the translation shot back to a speaker in my jaws. The natives chomped and rattled, and the translation rolled on almost instantly. I had the volume turned up, and the whole square echoed to my amplified machine voice. Some of the more credulous natives prostrated themselves, and others fled screaming. One doubtful type raised a spear, but no one else tried that after the pterodactyl eye picked him up and dropped him in the swamp. The priests were a hard-headed lot and weren't buying any lizards in a poke. They just stood and muttered. Had to take the offensive again. "Begone, O faithful steed," I said to the eye, and pressed the control on my palm at the same time. It took off straight up a bit faster than I wanted. Little bits of wind-torn plastic rained down. When the crowd was all going this ascent, I walked through the temple doors. "I will talk with you, O noble priests," I said. Before they could think of a good answer, I was inside. The temple was a small one built against the base of the pyramid. Hope I wasn't breaking too many taboos by going in. Since I wasn't stopped, it was all right so far. The temple was a single room with a murky-looking pool at one end. Sloshing in the water was an ancient reptile who was quickly one of the leaders. I waddled towards him and he gave me a cold and fishy eye, then he growled something. The MT whispered in my ear, "Just one in the name of the 13th sinner, you. What are you doing here?" I drew up my scaly figure in a noble gesture and pointed toward the ceiling. "I come from your ancestors to help you. I am here to restore the holy waters." This raised a buzz of conversation behind me, but got no useful response out of the chief. He sank slowly into the water until only his eyes were showing. I could almost hear the wheel turning behind that moss-covered forehead. Then he lunged up and pointed a dripping finger at me. "You're a liar. You are no ancestor of ours. You will—" "Stop!" I thundered, before he got too far in I couldn't back out. "I said your ancestors sent me as emissary. I'm not one of your ancestors. Do not try to harm me, or the wrath of those who have passed on will turn against you." When I said this, I turned to jab a claw at the other priests, using the motion to cover my flicking a coin grenade towards them. Blew an ice hole in the door with a great deal of noise and smoke. The first lizard knew I was talking sense then, and immediately called the meeting of the shamans. It, of course, took place in the public bathtub, and I had to join them there. We jawed and gurgled for about an hour and settled all the major points. I just found out they were all new priests. The previous ones had all been boiled alive for letting the holy water cease. Cheered by this information, I explained it was there only to help them restore the flow of the waters. They bought this, tentatively, and we all heaved out of the tub and trickled muddy paths across the floor. There was a bolted and guarded door that led into the pyramid proper. While it was being opened, the first lizard turned to me. "Undoubtedly you know the rule," he said. "Because the old priest did pry and peer, it was ordered henceforth that only the blind could enter the Holy of Holies." I was swearily smiling. If dirty teeth picking of what looked like a crack in an old suitcase could be called smiling. It was also signaling over an underpriest who carried a brazier of charcoal complete with red-hot irons. All I could do was stand and watch as he stirred up the coals, pulled out the ruddiest iron, turned toward me. It was just drawing a bead on my right eyeball when my brain got back into gear. "Of course," I said, "blinding is only right. But in my case you will have to blind me later, before I leave the Holy of Holies, not now. I need my eyes to see and mend the font of holy waters. Once the waters flow again, I will laugh as I hurl myself on the burning iron." It took a good 30 seconds to think it over, and in the end had to agree with me. The local torturer sniffled a bit and threw a little more charcoal on the fire. The gate crashed open and I stalked through. Then it banged to behind me and I was alone in the dark. But not for long. There was a shuffling nearby and I took a chance to turn on my flash. 3 priests were groping towards me, their eye sockets red pits of burned flesh. They knew what I wanted and led the way without a word. A crumbling and cracked stone stairway brought me up by a solid metal doorway labeled in archaic script, "Mark 3 beacon, entrance to authorized personnel only." The overly trusting builders had counted on the signs to do the whole job, for there wasn't a trace of a lock on the door. One lizard merely turned his handle and we were inside the beacon. I unzipped the front of my camouflage suit and pulled out the blueprints. With the faceless priest slumming after me, I approached the ancient machinery. There was a residue of charge in the emergency batteries, just enough to give a dim light. The meters and indicators looked to be in good shape, if anything, unexpectedly bright from constant polishing. I checked the readings carefully and found just what I expected. One of the eel lizards had managed to open the circuit box and polish the switches inside. While doing this, he had thrown one of the switches and caused all the trouble. Rather, that had started the trouble. It wasn't going to be ended just by reversing the water valve switch. This valve was supposed to be used only for repairs, and then only after the atomic pile had been damped. When the water was cut off with the pile in operation, it started to overheat, and the automatic safeties had dumped the whole works down into the pit. I could start the water again easily enough, but there was no fuel left on the reactor. But I wasn't going to play with the fuel problem at all. It was far easier for me to install a new power plant. I had one in the ship that was about 1/10 of the size of this ancient bucket of bolts. Before I sent for it, I checked over the rest of the beacon. 2,000 years, there should be some signs of wear, tear, and fatigue. The old boys had built well. I give them credit for that. 90% of the machinery had no moving parts and suffered no wear whatsoever. Other parts they beefed up figuring they would wear, but slowly. The water feed pipe from the roof, for example. The pipe walls were at least 3 meters thick, and the pipe itself opening no bigger than my head. There were some things I could do, though, and I made a list of parts. The parts, the new power plant, and a few other odds and ends were sorted in a neat pile on the ship. I checked all the parts by screen before they were loaded into a small metal crate. In darkest hour before dawn, the heavy-duty eye dragged the crate across the temple and darted away without being seen. I watched the priests do the pry eye when they tried to open it. When they'd given up, I boomed orders at them through a speaker in the crate. They spent most of the day swirling the heavy box up to the narrow temple stairs, and I enjoyed a good sleep. I was rushing inside the beacon door when it woke up. The repair didn't take long. There was plenty of groaning from the blind lizards when they heard me ripping the wall open to get to the power leads. Even hooked a gadget to the water pipe so the holy waters would have the usual refreshing radioactivity when they started flowing again. The moment this is all finished, I did the job they waited for. I threw the switch that started the water flowing again. There were a few moments when the water began to gurgle down through the dry pipe. Then a roar came from outside the pyramid that must have shaken its stone walls. Shaking my hands once over my head, I went down for the eye-burning ceremony. The blind wizards waiting from my door and looked even unhappier than usual when I found out why it was bolted and barred from the other side. "It has been decided," the lizard said, "that you shall remain here forever and tend to the holy waters. We will stay with you and serve your every need." A delightful prospect. Eternity spent in a locked beacon with 3 blind lizards. In spite of the hospitality I couldn't accept. "What? You dare interfere with the messenger of your ancestors?" I had the speaker on full volume and the vibrations almost shook my head off. The lizards cringed and I set my solar for a nearer beam and ran it around the door jamb. There was a great crunching and banging from the junk piled against it, and then the door swung free. I threw it open. Before they could protest, I had pushed the priests out through it. The rest of the crowd showed up at the foot of the stairs and made a great ruckus when I finished bolting the door shut. Running through the crowd, I faced up to the first lizard in his tub. He sank slowly beneath the surface. What lack of courtesy, I shouted. He made little bubbles in the water. The ancestors were annoyed and decided to forbid entrance to the inner temple forever. Though out of their eternal kindness, they will let the waters flow. Now I must return. So on with the eyeball the ceremony. The torture master was too frightened to move, so I grabbed the hard iron out of the coals. Touching the side of my face, dropped a steel plate over my eyes under the plastic skin. Then I jammed the iron hard into my 40 eye sockets, and the plastic gave off an authentic color. A cry went up from the crowd as I dropped the iron and staggered in blind circles. Must admit it went off pretty well. But enough was enough. Before they could get any more bright ideas, I threw the switch and the plastic pterodactyl sailed in through the door. I couldn't see it, of course, but I knew it had arrived when the grapples and the claws locked on the steel plates on my shoulders. I got turned around after the eye burning, and my flying beast hooked onto me backwards. I meant to sail out bravely, blind eyes facing in the sunset. Instead, I faced the crowd as I soared away, so I made the most of a bad situation through my snappy military salute. Then I was out in the fresh air and away. When I lifted the plate and poked holes in the seared plastic, I could see the pyramid going smaller behind me, water gushing out of the base, and a happy crowd of reptiles sporting in its radioactive rush. I counted my talent to see if I had forgotten anything. 1. The beacon was repaired. 2. The door was sealed, so there could be no more sabotage, accidental or deliberate. 3. The priest should be satisfied. The water was running again. My eyes had been duly burned out, and they were back in business. Which added up to 4. The fact would probably let another repairman in under the same conditions if the beacon conked out again. At least I'd done nothing like butchering a few of them that would make them antagonistic towards future ancestral messengers. I stripped off my tattered lizard suit back in the ship, very glad it would be some other repairman who would get the job. The end.